Welcome back to another episode of Capacity Overload, where we are talking to nonprofit leaders about how technology might help further empower their mission, vision, and values. I'm Jason. I'm here with Oliver Bellinger, our Chief Operating Officer. I'll let Oliver introduce himself and citizens, and then we're going to move to a special guest, somebody who's actually leaning into AI in the nonprofit space, and that's going to be an exciting conversation for today. So, Oliver, to you.
Thanks, Jason. Hey, folks. Oliver Belanger, COO of Citizen AI. Citizen AI is a navigation platform that helps connect people in need with the resources that can help them. We use AI to make it easy and to make it as smooth as possible for the nonprofit leaders we work with, as well as the clients they serve. And super excited for today's guest, Tauhric, from Bauer Family Resources. If you're not familiar with Bauer Family Resources, they do the work we're talking about, but they've been doing it for, is it 100 years? Is that?
Close to it, yes. 1929, so 97 years now.
You haven't been with them that long, have you, Tauhric?
No, I ain't been alive that long, brother. Good Lord.
I
For
couldn't resist, man.
an incredible period of time. And so super excited to have you on the show.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you, Jason and Oliver, for giving me this opportunity to share, right? So my name is Tauhric Brown. I have the distinct pleasure of serving as the Chief Executive Officer on behalf of the Board of Directors of Bauer Family Resources. As we talk through this, right, I'll kind of give you a primer. Our organization's mission is really to empower families and children to thrive. And that means a lot, right? But the vision simply is to create an environment and a community where children and families don't feel left behind. Or said a different way, my ECE director, my early childhood education director, gave this one to me, so I can't take credit for it. She said, T, what we do here is we enroll children, but we embrace families. Man, what a powerful statement.
Is awesome. So what does that look like in daily operations? How many counties are you in? I mean, you guys are in as many counties as just about IYI, I would think.
Yeah, it's a great question. And what I always like to say, tell folks is, before we really dig into the amazing work we do here in 2026, I think that it's really important for people to understand how we even got started, to fully appreciate the amazing work being done on behalf of children and families in our service area. So to give you kind of a snippet, right, our organization was founded back in 1929 by Tippecanoe County's first female probation officer named Grace Bauer. And what Grace Bauer saw was an environment where young people were getting into trouble, whether it was they're skipping school or getting involved in the streets or doing some other things that just were not okay. She decided that it was time to create a safe environment for kids and adolescents to come and congregate at versus being in the streets causing trouble and being in trouble. And so Bauer Family Resources was born out of that simple, aha, here's a problem that I would love to try and solve at some point. And so let's fast forward from 1929 to 1965, when President Lyndon Johnson signed the Head Start Act. Bauer Family Resources, because of all the great work it had done in the juvenile justice diversion space, in the literacy space, in the creating that after school environment for kids to come and know that it was safe and they were going to flourish and thrive, Bauer Family Resources was tapped on the shoulder as one of the first pilot sites for the Head Start program. And so as you kind of move forward now, we're providing that early Head Start and Head Start early childhood education in the counties of Clinton, Carroll, White, Tippecanoe, Hendricks, Owen, and Morgan counties. But that's not all we do, right? There's another side of our agency that is more youth services, juvenile justice diversion, literacy programming, and more importantly, our family-centered services, where we've got case managers that are connecting with families who are in need, right? I think about those upstream drivers of health, those things where a family works, lives, and plays and worships, right? And so oftentimes there are barriers that prevent them from having an opportunity to live their best lives. Sometimes it's transportation. That's the one that we hear most often. The second one that we hear most often is food deserts, food insecurity. And so our case managers and our wonderful team through our Family Resources Center and our community partnerships that we have in Tippecanoe County and other counties around those upstream drivers of health really help us connect families to the needed resources that they've got or need to hopefully help them make some good impacts into living the best lives that they can.
Go ahead, Oliver.
I just that's incredible. I did not realize how connected to family resources as a concept, if you think of Head Start, and provisions of that, from that perspective, Bauer was. That kind of blows my mind a little bit.
Well, you know what's really interesting, Oliver, about that is I kind of felt the same way when I started, right? September of 2025 is when I was blessed with this opportunity. And when I started, I first thought Head Start, early Head Start. A brother didn't know a whole lot about that space, right? My expertise was aging and disability. That's where I came from. That's where I had spent the last 15 and a half years. So all that I knew in the nonprofit sector was really geared towards extending longevity of aging in place for older adults and people with disabilities, right? So when you start in that children and family space, the first thought I was, oh, well, it's babysitting. And then when I started to dig into the performance standards, I figured out it's way more than that, right? It
Yeah.
is. And what Amy said is 100% accurate. Yeah, we may enroll children in our programs, but we really embrace families, right? And when we talk about that, it is a very holistic approach on the Head Start side and on the non-Head Start side at Bauer, right? We've got those consultants that are in the mental health space. We have a food and nutrition expert professional that's kind of helping us ensure that our kids are eating healthy, they are getting food, right? And all those things. But again, it's much deeper than that. It's not just having a safe place to take my baby or my kiddo that's 0 to 5 in the morning. I have that peace of mind as a parent to know everything around my kiddo and my family, Bauer is trying to help us be better in, improve in, enhance, empower in, right? And that really touches me at a different level than when I was in the aging and disability space.
You know, that really resonates with me, Tar, because when I first entered behavioral health, also in Lafayette, Indiana, and your chief operating officer back then, Cassie Wade, was a big part of
Yeah.
my introduction to Bauer. Love Cassie. She's with Indiana Youth Institute now. But I am a person in long-term recovery with alcohol use disorder, coming from 12-step recovery in Hamilton County. Like, once I got into peer recovery coaching and behavioral health systems of care, I never even dreamed how much generational trauma and some of the family dynamics that some of these individuals grew up with, that
Yeah.
the chain reactions that has from starting in early childhood development and ACEs, and there actually is a
Yes.
universe of ACEs, which is a resiliency score that can help with that, where you see programs like yours and mentorship programs actually build the resiliency that can reverse engineer some of those ACEs scores. Like, that whole world was just baffling to me, and I felt kind of like an ass, because I was always kind of like, well, it's a choice, I mean, I'm a
Right.
silver spoon fed. I chose to drink till I couldn't stop drinking kind of guy, and
There
I
you
just
go.
assumed that's what the rest of the world looked like. And man, I couldn't have been more wrong.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you mentioned ACEs, Jason, because that is an area that Kim, our chief services officer, both of you have met and kind of spent some time with, and Amy McKee, our early childhood education director, have really been leaning into that format, that kind of assessment over the last couple of months, because we do see the benefit. The problem is, right, and here's the challenge. It's how are you going to staff that? Are there some other options to maybe take you 75, 80% of the way there? And maybe that's non-human capital assets, right? But people in my sector, they don't see it that way. What most people say is, oh my goodness, technology means, this has been my experience, right? And you guys know, everyone doesn't know, but I haven't just spent my entire career in the nonprofit sector, right? I started in this professional journey as an active duty soldier in the United States Army right out of high school. After my 9.5 years of active duty service, I said, I don't want to do it anymore. And part of that had to do with recruiting command. That was the last assignment that I had. And I just didn't like what I saw politically, the bureaucracy. I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I would have had to re-enlist for my next duty assignment, and it was Korea. I was not going on another dependent restricted tour since I had just come back from Doha, Qatar 6 months earlier. So from there, I moved into the private sector. And in the private sector, it was retail. I owned a wireless franchise, opened BlackBerry retail stores in airports. So all that I learned in the private sector about business, running a business, operational effective and efficiencies, all these things, human capital and non-human capital, the desire was always to infuse it into the nonprofit sector when I got started. And thank the good Lord, it has worked, right? It has worked. And, to continue down that road is really going to be key for any nonprofit, not just for Bauer Family Resources, for any nonprofit. Last week, I got the pleasure of going to San Diego and spending a week at the U.S. Aging Annual Conference. U.S. Aging is still, again, that's kind of my background. So U.S. Aging, I still have deep ties and relationships with them and a lot of the area agency on aging CEOs and executive directors. And what was so phenomenal to me was that the sessions that were facilitated, there were more artificial intelligence seminars, workshops, general sessions that I have ever seen at this conference. I saw a lot of it at the National Head Start Association conference in Minneapolis earlier this year as well, in May. So you start to get a sense of, right, people are giving us, right, I say it this way, they're telling us exactly how we've got to be thinking and what we should be considering. But what I find most often in the nonprofit sector is my peers are afraid. And when you fear something, the natural reaction is, I don't even want to try it. I don't want to try it, right? There's uncertainty. They don't know how accurate is this information. And I always tell them it doesn't have to be. What you want to do is you leverage that Copilot option as a way to get a template. Help me develop this. Help me design. Help me think through. It's not going to do it all for you. There's still that human element that you've got to bring to it. But if that human element is less the time than what it would have been otherwise, guess what I've done? I've brought more productive time back to Tauhric to invest in other things to benefit Bauer Family Resources. All nonprofit leaders should be thinking with a head like that.
I love that message. Can I go from a macro standpoint of
Absolutely.
going back to, so I looked it up, and Tippecanoe County's first probation officer was in 1909, and you didn't have a female probation officer until 1929, right? And then with that first female probation officer came a different lens on how to address families, right? And I feel like not only women in tech, but nonprofits in tech are a necessary lens as we start to develop technologies that are going to extremely be or have major impact on society. we need that different lens, that altruistic lens of the nonprofit space, that mothering over capitalism lens of females in tech. Like, it's not just about us leveraging it, it's about us having a voice in how it's developed.
That's right, Jason. What a great point. Yes, 100%, right? And you did hit on something, and it's really interesting that you said it's that nurturing component, right? When that first mom nurturing, for me, I was raised by women, mom, grandma, aunts, right? I come from a single parent home. It was me, my mom, and my sister. So it should be no surprise to anyone, right, that I'm in a space where I can think very intentionally about how to help move families forward, even though I'm a guy. It's my upbringing. There were things put into me when I was a kid. I watched my mom struggle when I was a kid. I watched her get passed over for promotions to male colleagues with less education and less experience. I saw that happening in front of my eyes. And for me, I go, gosh, families are children. That's the future, right? We have got to really pour as much as we can into families. And oftentimes that's going to look different. It might involve some of those artificial intelligence tools, right? Because AI is a very broad term, and you really have to understand what is it that you're trying to do. If you just want a basic question answered, well, then maybe Copilot can help you. But if you need to go deeper, perhaps you've got to lean into some of these other tools like a Claude or Google Notebook or some of these other things that are out there. So I think it's and I will say it this way as well. AI is a tool that is designed to enhance the work, minimize all the manual. It doesn't mean a position's going away. It means I can reinvest that time saved into my business to drive further outcomes and impacts that maybe I wasn't able to do before without hiring another cadre of people. And the reality is what we see, right? And we talk about barriers, because I know we're going to unpack that, right? When we talk about barriers, the very first barrier I always talk about, it's funding. We see that at the federal, state levels, depending on what state you're in, the appetite to fund safety net kinds of programs, it's going away. Nobody's hungry for that anymore. I get that, but that poses a different challenge. And that different challenge is, how do I still make impact in spite of? What most nonprofit leaders do, and I'm sorry, I'm going to say it, they cry in their milk. Oh, they're taking this. Oh, they're taking that. When they should be grabbing that bull by the horn saying, yeah, but in spite of this change and shift, how are we still going to maintain? How are we still going to make impact in spite of? And that's where some of these newer technology and tools come to the forefront to help address some of that stuff.
Can I just double click on one more thing that you made me think? Because I was a United States Marine. You're an Army guy, right? And you mentioned a couple of different.
Oh, Lord, you're
You
one of them guys.
right. But when it comes to tools, right? Actually, you can make a lot of analogies there. So to me, NotebookLM is kind of the army. It's a jack of all. It can do a lot, a whole lot. It's a great place to start if you're learning something. If you really want something to dig around in your computer and not really care about permissions, Codex, OpenAI Codex is kind of the Marine, right?
Okay.
All right. If you need really specialized stuff and you need to be in the command line like the terminal, that's more of your Claude code in the
Got it.
CLI, which is more of your Air Force. You're gonna have to be you can't just dive into the Air Force and fly a plane. You're gonna have to learn a little something, right? And then
Yeah.
Copilot to me is kind of the National Guard. People make fun of it. It might have its
Interesting.
deficiencies, but it's necessary for for security. And Copilot is necessary because most businesses are run on Microsoft.
I love that analogy, Jason. Yeah, connected to the branches of service. I like that.
But I mean, you inspired it, so thank you. All right, let's dig in. Oliver, I know you got questions, man. I'm gonna shut up for a minute.
Well, I think, as I was listening and hearing you share about your story and your background, it struck me how impactful Amy's comment of enrolling children but embracing families
Yeah.
is. And I can imagine how that must be a very meaningful experience for you to be carrying that mission forward, to be carrying that flagpole. And I think one of the things that's come up so far in this conversation is the nuances and complexities around trauma informed care and around,
Yes.
the term that we used, ACEs. And it might be great to start off by explaining what an ACE is and a little bit of where that comes from, and how that uh, is meaningful in the work that y'all do and the challenges that come around that.
Yeah. So, trauma informed is really the piece that we've always had. It's been recently that one of our strategic partners, Mental Health of America, Wabash, kind of connected with us. And we started really talking about ACEs assessments to really identify and determine, right, what trajectory kiddo family might be on and how maybe to intervene sooner rather than later. That's always something, I always like to take the approach of prevention is key. If I can prevent something from happening, the better off this individual or this family will be. We also learned a ton from a good friend of mine who works at Humana, Michael Hammond. He did a lot of behavioral health work. So to Jason's point, Jason spent some of his career there. Mike spent a ton of his career in the mental health, behavioral health space in Kansas City. And he works for Humana now. And we had a conversation with Humana about some ACEs work, right? About some assessments, some preventative work around children and families. I think the biggest barrier and challenge there, it's twofold. One, diagnoses don't maybe happen until an individual reaches a certain age. However, those behaviors are very prevalent and out in front much sooner than that. And so, absent a diagnosis, how you engage and try and resolve, it looks different. With a diagnosis, there are specific things in place that kind of guide you to do these certain things on visits. Absent a diagnosis, you're kind of flying blind. And so the question becomes, how do we recreate or replicate what's over here so that when there are behaviors and we know this child is 2, right? And you guys may not understand this. I have teachers who are getting black eyes from children that are 3 and 4 years old. They're getting bitten on the skin and they break the skin. These are 3 and 4, 5-year-old kids. And so you're not going to have a diagnosis of this or that at that age. We also have several kiddos who are nonverbal. You're not going to have an autism diagnosis that early in life, right? So how do you replicate some of those tools that do exist post-diagnosis and infuse them into the situations and the behaviors that you're seeing? And we have family advocates, right? And family interventionists that are doing that kind of work. But again, absent that actual diagnosis, and I call it treatment plan, how do you replicate and know that you're making the impact that you need to make? I see AI at some being a front runner, a component of addressing that for us.
And so part of what I'm hearing is one of the challenges, especially when you're working with very young populations, is how do you identify ACEs or acute childhood experiences and how they present in those age groups where the traditional uh, diagnosing factors and the traditional methods apply less well. And it sounds like what I'm hearing is you're incorporating with working with experts like MHA of Wabash Valley and
Valley Oaks is another one that we
all of these
partner with.
folks
Yep.
to then really think about these, call it non-traditional methods for
Yes.
identifying the same underlying acute childhood experiences or equivalent signals of, to be then able to create a pseudo diagnosis or to inform the treatment plan and to inform the way that individual child and I assume.
Yes. Yep. Yes. 100%, Oliver.
And so, one of the things you mentioned when you, in relation to this very uh, problem set or this very initiative, is staffing and
Yeah.
how you think about equipping folks for this very complex and nuanced problem.
Yeah. You know what? And when I think about staffing, it's twofold, right? I put it in two buckets. I have supporting or value supporters. I've got value creators, value enabler, value creators, right? The value creators are our teachers' aides, our nutrition specialists, our family advocates, but our support, value enabling, that's me. It's finance, it's HR, right? It's those supporting leaders that kind of ensure that obstacles and barriers are removed from frontline staff so they don't have to deal with it. Here's the challenge. Over here on the value enable side, and as it relates to Head Start, you can only leverage up to a certain percentage of that drawdown to cover those positions. And oftentimes, what you find is that maybe you're overstaffed. People don't like to admit that, right? But it is a reality. Generally speaking, nonprofits throw bodies at new requirements. They throw bodies at this new grant that has all these different requirements that we've got to fulfill rather than pausing and going, what can I absorb in the assets I've currently got on the ground? And then what's missing? How do I replicate that perhaps using something other than human capital, non-human capital assets, right? So that's a big one. And that ebbs and flows more than one might think, because what it boils down to is it boils down to how close you are to being fully enrolled on the Head Start and Early Head Start world. Those enrollments are what trigger and drive your revenue and reimbursement. And so if you're not fully enrolled, generally speaking, you're not, because you're not fully staffed. Those become the two things, right, that happen. You're either not fully staffed, and that compromises your ability to be fully enrolled because classrooms have ratios. And so you've got to have one teacher, one teacher's aide to the X number of kiddos, right? If you don't have that staffing model, you can't enroll up. And so that admin fee, it's a constant ebb and flow that you've got to look at and watch, right? And so I always ask the question, how might AI, right? How might AI help in that space so that we're not doing a bunch of manual looking and checking and revisiting this and that, right? And then over on the value create side, it's how do we leverage AI so that we might be able to bring in more of those professional human capital assets that we just don't have the wherewithal to bring into the fold today? So these are very complex issues, right? And I believe that both of them, they have scenarios and solutions. I don't think one solution solves it, right? I think that it's probably a combination of a couple things here and a couple things here, right? To really help it really go to where you want it to. But those are the things I think about when you talk about staffing, right? It's let me break it out into buckets.
Yeah.
And explain how it works, because both of them they're different challenges with different complexities that you've got to really get your head around before you can start to even explore or investigate what might be the best solution to help you carry this water over here and over here.
Well, and that
kind
is
of
so
looking.
well articulated from an executive director position. As having been a development director for the Salvation Army, right? What I hear you saying is a lot of the grants and funding opportunities are earmarked, and only a certain amount of that can go to admin spend. So we have to be mindful of how we spend our admin. On the inverse side of that, and this is the argument that I always had as a development director, right? You spend a lot of time filling out grants, writing newsletters, writing social media posts. Like, is that really where your value is? You go back to
That's right.
the complaints about losing all this grant money. Best practices say 70% of your income as a nonprofit should come from private donors and
It
local
should.
foundations. So
It
if I
should.
let AI write my newsletters, help me fill out my grants, now I can spend more time either going door to door and thanking the individual donors that are supporting my organization, or sitting across from potential donors that will continue to let us thrive regardless of what administration's in the White House and what's going on with the grant situation.
100% right, Jason. Right. Look, I welcome the day where I can sit with individuals and talk about having Bauer as part of their estate plan. Right. I don't have that opportunity right now. Right. But I would love to at some point, because from the development aspect, it's me. I'm the person doing it. We're not, again, Head Start nuances. Head Start funds can't be used for fundraising. So that means you can't hire development people on the backs of that Head Start funding. And then on the other side of our agency, there's just not enough scratch to be able to do much with, right? So it has to fall on the shoulders of those who are already in place. And because I've done it before, because I have experience in it, I'm the one that has owned it. But I would love to have those, major donor cultivation meetings and coffees. And I've had maybe 3 or 4 in the 7, 8 months I've been here. Gosh, I really wish that was 100 plus, right? How cool would it be to have something different doing that stuff in the background? So that, right, to Jason's point, so I've got those extra hours every week to lean into some of that major gift and major donor implementation, because we don't have that currently.
And AI can't do that. We have not
No,
developed
it
AI.
can't.
I'm going to
That's
have a
a huge,
conversation
that's
with
right.
Linda Rohrman and get her to support your organization more thoroughly, right?
That's right, Jay. AI is not going to do it. That's a personal
Yes.
connection, right?
Absolutely. I think, and what you're describing, everything kind of comes back to a question of bandwidth and a question of resource allocation. And it's very interesting to look at the nuances of how the source of funding, in this case, Head Start and general federal guidelines, has a strong restriction on your back office and your value enablement ratio and percentages in relationship to your front office and value creation side. And so I think within that context, lower overhead is always better, because it gives you more flexibility through
Yes.
changing tides. Where, let's look at both. And I love this breakout of front office and back office, because to your point, different considerations, different circumstances. What are some opportunities for integration of technology to create more bandwidth that you're seeing on the front office side, and what are you seeing on the back office side? And, I know you guys are really far ahead in terms of your integration and use of technology and AI. And so would love to also hear about some of the ways you've solved or taken advantage of those opportunities or solved some challenges using this technology.
Yeah, so both great questions. So on the value supporting side, here's what I'll say. I would really love to find or explore opportunities where our applicant workflow was shored up, right? So from that recruitment, and I'll give you an example. There were 521 applications that were submitted to vacant jobs at Bauer Family Resources in the month of June. Of those 521, only 175 of them were eligible, if you will, right, based on the criteria and qualifications of those positions. And of that 175, 74 were interviewed. Okay, so the 174 went through pre-screen, some were screened out, Some were sent down to the hiring leaders to do interviews. And of those 70, there were 4 offers made. And I think that take rate, I just believe that take rate is very low. And I think that there could be some work that we could do from a qualification perspective, from a, scenario where an individual's got to pass go before they collect their $200, right? If we're talking monopoly terms, right? Don't pass go, don't collect 200. I'd want people to be weeded out before any human contact was made. To have 100 folks that just, that pre-screen was done and something with those 100 folks it just wasn't a cultural fit. Perhaps that's what it was, but that's a lot of people to screen out. And so, how might we be able to either leverage technology to raise those numbers a little bit by the questions and answers that are already there, right? Or that need to be enhanced some to weed out folks. So that's one. And then the second area that I think about is I think about the administrative assistant side. I think about our finance and accounting processes, right? A lot of those processes are very static. They're the same iteration, same cadence every single week, every single month, every single year. How might we be able to do something about that? Right? So that the time that our human capital is currently spending in that space can be freed up so that my financial reporting can be more timely, right? I want it to be as close to, I'll say, real time as possible. I know that's a pipe dream as a nonprofit CEO, right? In the private sector, you get that. In the nonprofit sector, generally speaking, you're about a month in the arrears, right? Because of how your claiming goes and all of that. But in the Head Start world, you can draw down every week. In fact, you can draw down every day if you needed to. And so I believe that ability to draw down more regularly than net 30 gives us a real opportunity and shot to have very close to real-time reporting on my revenue and expense and my expenses. But I know that my human capital is spending so much time in, doing all these manual things that maybe they don't have that additional capacity and bandwidth to get me as close to that real time as possible. But that's the desire, right? So on the finance side, it's looking at those processes to really see is there something that we might be able to do to repurpose this time? So let's save the time and repurpose the human capital to do something else. And the same thing conversely with with our workflow and applicant workflow, right? How might we be able to shore that up in a way where I don't need to use as much human capital time? And that human capital time could be reinvested in things like succession planning, in things like training and development, right? I want a director in training curriculum and program at our agency. I want to be able to groom those next directors, C-suite leaders from within. But I can't do that if I don't have good course curriculum to train and develop them through. And so that succession planning becomes really, really key. How about culture? Ensuring that cultural environment is exactly what myself, right? Because I'm the face of the organization. So that culture environment has got to be, as received and accepted through that HR lens to really drive more of those activities through the organization, whether it be wellness programs, right? Those are the kinds of things that I want my human capital out in front doing. I don't want them behind a computer trying to do all this other stuff. If there's an alternative way that frees up time for them to get at it more. From the administrative assistant side, I'll say the biggest rub right now, it is maintenance. So we have a maintenance board, right? That a maintenance ticketing system that our MSP created for us. BSS is our managed service provider. And this ticket, we don't have a maintenance person. Melinda, my executive assistant, she's the one that's been receiving all of those tickets when they come in, preparing the vendors for going out and fixing or replacing what needs to be done. And so when you have old buildings with old bones, right? Old equipment, what's going to happen? You're going to see more maintenance tickets come in. That means more time and work that Melinda's got to dedicate to getting work ordered, structured, scheduled, etc. And it means she has less time to do the executive assistant stuff that a CEO might need an executive assistant to do, right? I'm not quite sure what that might look like, but it is becoming a challenge. I'm finding that I'm spending more of my time shoring up and doing some of the things that Melinda would normally do when I first started. We had to make that shift because our facilities person, we could not keep them based on our admin rate spend. Right. So you got to make those sacrifices. And so the question becomes, it's a void. I know we've got to address that at some point. I can't have Melinda doing both jobs, right, all the time, forever and ever. That was not the reason we made that move. We made that move as a short-term solution until we could identify a different and alternative way to either A, bring back some kind of facilities presence, whether it be a 1099 scenario, which is probably more advantageous to a business than a W-2 scenario, right? In those kinds of situations. Or is there some process automation stuff that could be done? I think that's probably a little more complicated because it would involve all your vendors. They've got to be in the mix too. So that's a larger scale project that I just don't know it makes sense for us to invest or be involved in right in this moment. So those are the things that jump out to me, Oliver, of, the back office, the front office, right? I've given you guys a lot, but these are great conversations to have because I can see Jason's wheels turning. I can see your wheels turning, right? So yeah, so I'm grateful to have the time to connect with you guys again.
Well, I
Well,
want to
and
start because I want to say you would have made a hell of a Marine because the first thing you mentioned was the most controversial AI technology out there, which is as sorting through applications using HR technology is like that's a hot button. But I actually think that there are certain things with artificial intelligence that if you put enough work into the front end, it saves you a ton of time in the back end, right? So you could build a
Yes.
project in Claude, which you can automate through Claude co-work that has your heuristics for what you're looking for. But then you would have to ask it like, what are we not thinking of? And then you would have to do
Yeah.
a lot of evals. You would have to evaluate it, which would allow you an opportunity with your C-suite staff or your leadership staff to say, where do we see bias here? What do we consider bias? What biases do we have? But once you fine tune that down to the point where it was not having anywhere, and biases in AI can show up weird. There was a company that noticed that it was hiring that they were bringing on a whole bunch of Johns because the AI had looked and the most common name of someone who'd gotten a raise in the last 5 years was John. So it thought that was an indicator of a successful employee, right? Things have gotten better since then. It was 2 years ago, but I really do think that using it for tools like HR are very possible. It's people who just use out of the box and say, go
Yeah.
sort through these applications that end up getting bit in the butt by the fact that they did that. There are biases that humans wouldn't have thought of. So if you put the time into it, you could definitely develop a tool like that.
Yeah. I appreciate that feedback, Jason.
yeah, I also think there might be that ATS or that application sorting and orchestration, let's say, and qualifying. To Jason's point, is the kind of thing where there might be some beyond going with a cloud route or Claude route. There might be some purpose-driven tools that are specifically designed to solve that problem. You would want to, though, given that it introduces a whole bunch of fair hiring practice questions, you would want
Yes.
to, whether it's your own solution, test that thoroughly and think about kind of the odds and ends in that, and potentially ask, if you want to really cover yourself there, ask someone
Yeah.
to do an evaluation or quick audit of that specific process if you do homegrown. If you don't do homegrown, you go with something, purpose driven that's in the market for that specific problem, then you would want to go with multiple different providers and
Okay.
do your own audit of them, of like a real
Okay.
evaluation period, just because you do open yourself up to introducing fair
Yes.
hiring
Agreed.
potential issues.
N-
Um,
I'm with you there, Oliver. And those are, again, those are the things that you have to make sure that you've got in place, right? That's what policies are for. That's what procedures are for. You understand that this kind of shift, sure, it poses risk and liability to a business, right? But here's the reality. So does doing nothing. If you do nothing in these times of uncertainty, you are as much putting your agency at risk and increasing its vulnerability for liability as well.
Yep, 100%, especially as you think about that admin rate. And, you're talking about
Absolutely.
74 interviews is a lot of human capital time. It's
It is.
a lot of time. And so, if you shave that down to 50 from 74,
That's
then
right.
that's 25 hours. It's half a week. That's been,
That's right.
and sorry, interviews might be long. Like it could be pretty long. So that could be up to like half a week, if not more, that goes back into that individual or individuals, ability to use their resources for furthering the mission. The maintenance one is interesting,
Hmm.
because it actually might be easier than you think. And one of the nice things about it is that there there isn't really a long tail liability,
Okay.
because there's a front tail liability, but there isn't really this like long tail, like what if we introduce bias into the whole thing, or things like that. So there's the like obvious liability of, you get a ticket. What if you send it to the wrong vendor? What if the wrong
Right.
thing gets fixed? What if someone spends too much money fixing it? And those are problems, but they're problems that you're dealing at the front of the process, and they're front and center obvious problems, which are easier to address and handle, because you don't have to sit there going, what am I missing? What am I missing? What am I missing? You can just identify the risks and address them, um, and then get the value up front. So if you think
Nice.
about that process, right? You have these support tickets. I'm assuming the process looks like something like this today. Support ticket comes in. Your assistant looks at it and goes, "Is this real?" Question one. Okay, it's legitimate. All right. Question two of, now it's legitimate. You look at it and you go, all right, what category of vendor or what vendor does this pertain to? Okay.
Yes.
So then you go, okay, I have identified the vendor that it pertains to. If she's uncertain, she might have three vendors it could be, and then she comes to you or the appropriate person to ask the question, is this the right vendor? Is this the right set of vendors? Am I thinking about this the right way? So that's the identifying of the vendor. The next piece is then communicating to the vendor the appropriate information in the ticket, which the ticket may be insufficient for. There may be other places to have to get that information, but it's communicating to the vendor the work that needs to be done. Then it's receiving from the vendor a quote of some sort of that work and a meeting for that work to be looked at potentially.
Yes.
And then it's determining whether that quote is, within the ballpark of reasonable, and at least to as good as the folks involved can determine it. A general contractor will have a different opinion, of course, than someone who is not a general contractor. But then it's determining, like, are we willing to pay this, and is it reasonable? And then
Yes.
it's saying yes, right? Communicating, yes, we accept the quote to that vendor, or no, we don't accept the quote, lower it or whatever. And then they then it's scheduling for the work to be done.
Yes.
And then it's confirming the work was done.
Yep.
And that's
Here's the only, yep, that is the process today. Let me throw one wrinkle in there.
always.
At some point, right? So quote comes in. If it is a Head Start location and you are paying for this using federal funds and the quote is more than $2,000, you have to use the Davis-Bacon Act. And so the Davis-Bacon Act says prevailing wages. You've got to pay your employees a livable wage is basically what the act says. Here's the problem. Of those 3 vendors that you're going to select, only one of them will want to do Davis-Bacon. And so I think at some point you got to go, is the quote over $2,000? Are you an organization that is willing, right, to follow and fill out the documentation for the Davis-Bacon Prevailing Wages Act? So that's got to go in there somewhere. If I'm not using Head Start money to pay for this repair, it doesn't matter. But when I'm using, and the challenge is the only location that is non-Head Start is our corporate location in Lafayette on Fountain Street. Every other location that we have, it's Head Start. So there are going to be those Davis-Bacon Prevailing Wages Acts that must be followed in order for us to do business. And if the quote is over $10,000, the federal government, the Office of Head Start, must pre-approve that expense. They must pre-approve the vendor. They must be able to see that you have choice of provider, right? It's always a given. And then when they approve, you can select the provider and move forward. If they don't, you're not going to be able to do the work unless you're self-funding it.
That makes sense. So I think there's actually an opportunity in that.
Okay.
And the opportunity is those nuanced tweaks, knobs, flags, like those
Yes.
like permutations. They're actually not super difficult to introduce.
Really?
One,
See, and I would think because I consider them outliers, Oliver. So I consider those outliers
they're
being
the
a little different.
in your case, they're the main liars.
Yeah. Well,
But
yeah,
once
true.
they're difficult, they get in the way of getting the first version done because they
Okay.
add complexity. Once you have all the kinks worked out of the core component, then they're actually not that hard to introduce, but they're harder to introduce up front. And so the opportunity you have is because you have such a small amount, so one location that isn't Head Start,
Yes.
you would be able to build through the process for that location first, get everything ironed out where you don't have those considerations, and then extend that workflow for those considerations. And you could do it piece by piece. So you could first with, okay, just this location. We only take tickets for this location, build it out, solve it, and figure it out for that. The next step you would do is you would go, okay, we're now going to open up for Head Start. However, if we're going to open up for Head Start and we're going to only do things that are below 2,000, meaning if a quote comes back above 2,000 and it's a Head Start location, we're going to deal with that manually. We're going to abort that from the flow.
That
and
makes sense.
that manually. Once that's working well, then you go, okay, now we're going to introduce less than 10,000 into the mix and work out all the kinks on that and figure that out.
Okay.
And then if it comes back 10,000, we go manual. And then at the very end, do you do that final component? And maybe you never do the 10,001 through the AI because it's not worth it.
Right.
Because, you probably have a dozen of those per year that come up. And the complexity of dealing with the federal government is such where you maybe don't want an AI messing with that.
Yeah, right.
You want a person dealing with that. And that's okay because the volume of work goes down from dealing and triaging hundreds of tickets down to
That's
a
right.
dozen tickets. And you're basically saying, we'll keep doing it the way we've been doing it for the highest risk, lowest volume of the work units, but we'll be able to automate the rest of the work unit, which fits very nicely into how you're thinking about really increasing that bandwidth, because those higher risk, larger amount units of work are actually not bandwidth consuming, and they're not, they don't even feel like a waste, because you're like, I actually do want to take a look and dig into, should this be $10,000? Maybe it should be $9,500. Like
Right.
you probably want to be spending that extra attention on that end of things. And it's the, who cares about $20 versus $25, right? Like it's that high volume, because the administrative load of the high volume of stuff and the low risk high volume is the same administrative load, more or less, maybe a little bit less, but not that much less than the like higher risk low volume amount. And so if you can knock out the low risk high volume, then you build up all that bandwidth.
That makes sense. I like that, actually, because it does provide more time back to that individual to do more of those things that I need them to do.
And, you probably, even if there was an AI that was like, we can do this perfectly, you'd be like, yeah, but I still want to read it.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Like, even if it does it trust but verify thing.
Even if it does it perfectly every time, you'd probably be like, because, if you have an employee doing it, well, let me ask you, with your assistant, for those 10,000 plus that involve the federal government coordination, you or someone in the C-suite probably still looks at those, right? Before
Jennifer does. Yep. Our CFO does.
Yep. Because, like you don't even, we don't even trust like employees to do that completely autonomous. We want someone who's on the board or an officer or someone who has real long-term, shared risk to be overlooking that and taking responsibility for overlooking that. And that holding of liability or that holding of interest function doesn't go away because you add an AI into the mix. Now, things where you let go of that because you look at it and you go, it doesn't matter. It's not super important. It's not critical. That goes away, and AI can handle a lot of that. But like AI is never going to hold the liability for you.
Right.
It doesn't have a license. Like it doesn't have a license, right? Like you can't.
Right. Yeah.
All the mechanisms by which we create a society for individual people to hold liability, which is a core economic function of many jobs, AI will never do, because AI cannot be held responsible. Machines cannot be held responsible for their actions. Corporations can, individuals can, but machines cannot.
Unless you're in Argentina.
Did they change that in Argentina?
Yes. Argentina does recognize AI personhood,
Really?
AI business ownership. So I would never say never when it comes to AI.
What does that? But okay, so how does that?
Your risk profile goes up.
So if the AI,
Peter Thiel, he moved down there and helped him figure out how to devise that.
But doesn't that end up getting traced back to a person or other corporation? I don't know. There's so many questions that is a rabbit hole. We're just going to say
that's crazy. Yeah, that's a rabbit hole for another day, Jensen.
I knew you'd appreciate that rabbit hole, Oliver. Okay? I want to throw a quick realistic rabbit hole though, right? Because we got the data center conversation going on here, and you mentioned earlier on that transportation is the number one thing that people bring up for not being able to. If we could stop being so polarized, first off, data centers don't use a lot of water. If they use the inner loop ones, they use about as much as a restaurant. But they do use a lot of electricity. There are pros and cons to them, right? But if we could stop being so polarized and be pragmatic when these places want to build, there is no reason why you could not use Waymo type gridding and LiDAR in a Monticello or some other rural area to have paid for transportation that runs autonomously, that's paid for by Meta or Google or Nvidia or whoever wants to build one of these data centers. So I wish we would lean more into those conversations of how can we take care of some of these social services issues that we have seemed to struggle with for over a decade with some of this funding that these data centers are willing to spend in order to build their facilities in our state.
That's a great point, Jason. Great point. I think my immediate reaction and response to that is love where your head's at. I believe and feel the same way. Reality is that people care about how it impacts them. And they're not, people are no longer, and this is the sad part about where we are as a society today. People no longer care about their neighbors. And I'm not going to say all people, but enough percentage now are like, it's about me. It's dog eat dog. Growing up in the 70s and 80s, people cared about their neighbors. People checked in on each other, right? Today, it's like pulling teeth to get someone to just have that community kind of feeling of checking on your neighbors, going and seeing what's happening. So, Jason, I say I love where your head's at, and I 100% agree with you. I think the people, right, who are in these town hall meetings and city and county council meetings talking about no data centers, they're never going to move off that because they're thinking about it from the lens of how is this data center going to impact my lifestyle? Not how can it be beneficial to, maybe it's not me directly, but those around me. That's the conversation we need to be having, that it feels like we've lost that a little bit.
You're not wrong. I think that boils down to the same thing with AI integration inside your business, which is everybody has to have kind of their own chat GPT moment. They have to see
That's
where this
right.
technology actually benefits them. Then the data center makes sense. Then the subscription makes sense. And that's not easy to do because it is
It's
so
not.
individual.
Yes.
But you know what? Conversations with guys like you really open the eyes, hopefully, of people to say, like, just get that exploratory mind. Just go. If you tried this technology 2 years ago, it is so different than it was 2 years ago, right? Take your biggest pain in the butt at work and go into a paid system. Don't go into just a free one, right? And just ask it, like, how could you help me fix this problem? And people might be absolutely amazed.
Yeah, I'm sure they would be. Gosh, man, what a great conversation.
Agreed. Agree. I knew it
Awesome.
was gonna be.
What a great conversation, you guys.
You got to join us again sometime.
I'd love to. You can put me in the normal rotation. I'd love to come back
Sounds good. We hope you get
these
that
are the kinds
OpenAI
of
grant.
things, right? Well, and again, it's every single nonprofit leader that I have an opportunity to spend some time with. I always talk to them about, I ask them, hey, are you all leaning into AI at all? Right? Have you done any exploratory things? Right? Kim and I have used it quite a bit. It's the Copilot, right? So it's the freer, but it at least helps us get the skeleton. And then we can put the meat on the bones. I've saved us 10, 15 hours a piece a week. That's a big deal, you guys. And so I talk about that a lot with executive directors, COOs, CFOs that I have an opportunity to dialogue with. And I tell them, look, yeah, oh my God, T, I'm afraid of that. I said, well, many people are. I said, you know what? I was afraid of it initially too, but I just had to ask it, right? Da, 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 da. And what came back was, I'm like, holy crap, how did it know all this? But the question I asked was very detailed and very specific, right? It was, tell me, I wanted to know juvenile justice diversion information specific to Clinton County. Why? Because we just got a grant for $85,000, 2 years, to enhance and expand our juvenile justice diversion work in Clinton County. So I wanted to get some insights into who the partners are, who the players are, right? What other support groups exist in that county. And so the skeleton it gave me was awesome. And then what did I do? I needed to call some folks. I needed to have some conversations, right? To begin to prepare for what this grant's going to do and how it's going to work. But the goal is I want to replicate it. I want to be able to go after that money for all 9 counties that I'm in, not just Clinton. So it's interesting to me that, many of the leaders I deal with, and here's what I'll say. It's those that are more forward thinking, visionaries, have not been in the nonprofit sector their whole careers, that get it. They're the ones that go, you know what, T? Yeah, we're doing it. Yes, we're involved. But the problem with that is that only consumes 25% of the overall nonprofit sector. We got to get more of the 75% of the naysayers coming forward. We got to move them, right? They're detractors. We got to move them to here, to then supporters. That's how I think about it. How do we continue to flex this muscle to be able to do that?
You're definitely doing your part, my friend, and we thank you for it.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm willing to help in any way I can, gents. Like I said, I get excited. You guys, I get excited. I can go on for days talking about this kind of stuff, because it is where businesses can move from good to great. If they just would lean into some of these things, right? It's real easy for you to take that business from good to great. And we got to leave our businesses better than when we started in them. And so any information, any insight I can share with my peers, I'm definitely going to share it.
Makes a lot of sense.
Thank you, Tauhric.
You're very welcome, you guys. I know we're over time, and I've got another meeting to get to here in a little bit.
All good. We will say goodbye, but with a grateful thank you and definitely an invitation to return to this conversation at a later date.
I absolutely would love it. It was great seeing you guys. Take care.
All right. Thank you.